Chapter 8. Disarm Trap. The two little men rode in the cart drawn by the miniature mule troika. They had spent hours making their way toward the plains of claystone, traveling toward the four-pillar junction. The land they traveled across looked flat and dull, barely enough variety to distract their attention. The miniature mule troika continued on the main roads, for the most part passing dried-up ponds, patches of green weeds with streaks of white in them, and the occasional curious animal. Once, they even passed a large plot of farmland and an old farmer wandering about checking the conditions of his crops. Sometimes, the miniature mule troika would take a shortcut over a dirt trail or grassy plain. During one of these shortcuts, they found themselves passing an ancient building made out of rock and cold-wrought iron, rising a few stories up, the top appearing to be strangely broken off. Since it was completely enveloped in spongy growths of ivy, they almost missed it. Brox, realizing that both of them needed to get out of the cart and walk around a little, brought the miniature mule troika to a standstill next to an opening that appeared to be a doorway. The two of them removed large portions of tangled vines. They saw two doors of glass, one complete and the other broken. The first thing that they noticed inside were rotting davenports and tables. Most of those had fallen apart and others had tear marks from claws. Along some of the walls were chairs in near-perfect condition made out of a substance neither had ever seen. Thistlethorn sat down on one of the chairs, and it snapped in half. They looked like they were in excellent condition, but obviously, they were not. They found small, even by their size, alcoves that had metal walls. Glowing on one wall, they saw a blue light. It was not the light from a candle or lantern, but just a part of the wall glowing. It proved a very poor light, so poor that one could not even read by it. Nevertheless, it produced enough of a faint glow that they could see some strange plants that appeared to be growing inside. They were planted in small pots, so Brox guessed that someone took them outside from time to time to get some sunlight. They decided to leave before that someone returned. Although the building appeared unoccupied, they did not want to be detained by whoever took care of the plants. They passed several small villages resting atop knolls or in low, shady valleys. Some of these villages had palisades surrounding them to protect them from marauding orcs. Usually, the gates to these places stood open, but these all remained closed, and guards with halberds and pitchforks could be seen patrolling the walls. These men-at-arms all ignored the miniature mule troika and its cart with two little men. They all seemed to be distracted, as if watching for something dark to come over the horizon, not orcs, something very sinister, a salacious, shadowy, sickly, scolding sinister. Blue skies mingled with shades of red and grey as the sun slipped casually behind the sparse growth of trees on the plains of claystone. The miniature mule troika pulled the cart across a gully filled with clay ruts and loose gravel as they wound between the four-pillar junction. In the far distance of the horizon, they could see the hazy outline of a whitewashed farmhouse. The cart bumped, jostled, and rumbled along over the uneven ground that headed toward the farmhouse. The miniature mule troika no longer traveled on a main road. In fact, it was not even on a trail or a dirt path. The last half of a mile proved very rough, so much so that Thistlethorn walked that leg of the trip. When the miniature mule troika got about 10 feet away from the deserted farmhouse, they simply stopped of their own accord. After Brox climbed down from the cart and gathered his belongings out of the back, the miniature mule troika turned around and began to return to the manor of Cloak Toff. Brox and Thistlethorn stood there a moment and watched them. To their surprise, the animals and the cart began to fade, shimmering like a mirage. After about 20 or 30 paces, they simply disappeared altogether. An hour later, the sky appeared completely dark, not even a single star showed through the overcast skies. Both of them felt exhausted from riding in the cart all day long, and they decided to sleep to give their aching joints a chance to recover. Ironically, neither wanted to enter the whitewashed farmhouse with the sun down. They decided to build a fire in a weedy fire pit in the backyard where they could speak about the unusual, and sometimes scary, tales that they had heard on their trip here. Let's talk about that story the stonecutter told us a few hours ago. Brox referred to a man who spoke of rapping sounds on his windows by a coal-black squirrel late at night. The man said that the squirrel kept repeating words such as destruction, calamity, pain, suffering, and chilling touch. When the sun came up, the squirrel melted like a black snowball, leaving a sticky sludge behind. After they spoke about that tale, they went on to speak about several more. When one family looked at dishes placed decoratively on a wall, they saw skulls with archaic smiles on them. Upon closer examination, they saw nothing out of the ordinary but white plates with floral designs along the edges. On a foggy morning a couple of days ago, an entire village claimed to have seen ranks upon ranks of skeletons armed with bone clubs, marching in perfect unison, banners flying and drums beating. When the fog had been burned away by the sun, no trace of the undead could be found, not even a single bent blade of grass from the hundreds of stepping feet. There existed countless reports of shadows at night leaning toward the source of light instead of away from it. Entire farming communities would find cows from one field in another farmer's field. Pranksters were sought but never found. A general terror settled upon the people when they would find chickens, not in the coops, but in the cellars. To compound this, dogs would gather, forming straight lines and howling at invisible objects, sometimes charging and snipping at the heels of who knows what. Wells would have brackish water in them like the Earl's Well. Barrels of rainwater often produced what could only be described as chalky grey water, similar to spoiled milk. Little chunks of dirt turned out to be brown maggots. At night small children would get up and open windows and doors for no reason. When questioned as to why they opened them, they would simply reply, "How else are they supposed to get in?" Parents resorted to nailing windows shut and placing heavy tables in front of doors. The somber cold of the morning sky dangled in stout chunks of bleak murkiness against the backdrop of the lonely whitewashed farmhouse. In nearly a complete circle around the plains of claystone, standing like tarnished spear points, prevailed the tops of some lesser mountain range. An opaque barricade to the lands beyond, their durable stone peaks were dark in the endless discoloration of the sky above. Brox and Thistlethorn made preparations for the day, and after finishing breakfast, they headed toward the farmhouse. At that time they saw something that they had not seen the night before, a mailbox. The mailbox had splintered and rotted from years of weathering. The top had been ripped open, and one side was completely missing. Brox could see a leather letter binder in the mailbox as he approached it. He stopped a couple of steps away from the mailbox and peered closely at the binder. He was amazed beyond degree when he saw his name on it. The leather letter binder had a string tied around it and a little tan card on the string with the name Kin Bobby Brox neatly written in the affluent style. He took it out of the mailbox, untied the string, unrolled the leather letter binder, and pulled out a small note that was no bigger than his hand. It had a list of words on it. Hemlock, ivy, oak, sumac, these equal the style of your death. Underscore 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 remember the canon of fevers. Drop dead and rot. Another letter from the Shaden morgue, asked Thistlethorn. Unquestionably. Brox looked hard at the letter. How would he know that I was here? That question made both of them very afraid. They immediately started looking around, expecting zombies and ghouls to dig up through the ground or a horde of skeletons or some other undead nightmare to rush out of the farmhouse and attack them. Are you supposed to figure out what word goes on all of those blanks? Asked Thistlethorn. I guess so. What do hemlock, ivy, oak, and sumac have in common? The answer to that question was easy for the gnome since he knew druidic magic. Poison. Exactly, said Thistlethorn, nodding his head in agreement at the simple answer. I have no idea what kind of clue canon of fevers could be. What do we know about the canon of fevers? Brox shook his head. A dead language used long ago by the Congress of Blarks. It consists of an alphabet using skulls. Thistlethorn looked at the number of dashes, 12. The shortling leaned against the mailbox post, rubbing his hand on his chin. He shifted through the possibilities of what Brox had just said. He focused on the word skull. Having had ties to rogues in years gone by, one word quickly came to his mind. Skullduggery. Brox looked at him questioningly. Skullduggery. Thistlethorn shrugged. The Lick plans to use skullduggery to poison you. He thought about that for a moment. And, maybe, poison me, too. Thistlethorn noted this last observation, hoping it would make his friend feel a little better, but the thought seemed flat and did not have the desired effect. Therefore, he moved toward the door. After checking for traps, which consisted of looking for loose boards, testing for tripwires, searching for magical runes, and a very careful investigation for anything out of the ordinary, Thistlethorn led the way inside the farmhouse. He had lost his short sword in the battle with the griffin and, therefore, proceeded with a dagger in his hand. The door that they had entered, a back door, went straight into the kitchen. The cabinets, with their brass handles and ornate cuts in the shape of celery sticks and tomatoes, were all closed, except one. Its door had fallen off its hinges. They found the table in good condition, totally clean, save for some dust and a handful of salt crystals gathered in a small heap at one end. They did not see any chairs at the table, but the broken leg of a chair could be found under the table with dog chew marks on it. A cursory exam showed 3 bedrooms, a living room, a sitting room, a pantry, and over a dozen closets. On guard against the undead, they cautiously walked through the rooms. They found each room filled with trash, consisting of shredded beds, chunks of ceiling that had fallen to the floor, tipped over chairs, and end tables that had been chopped up and stacked next to the fireplace. Thistlethorn examined the fireplace to see how long ago since its last use, which he determined to be on the order of years. He noticed a thread-thin, nearly invisible crack that ran all the way around one of the bricks, a brick located almost at the top, just before merging with the ceiling. Taking the only remaining iron poker, he stood on the pile of firewood and pressed the brick. To his surprise, he heard the grinding sound of a bolt sliding over. He had expected to see another brick move, revealing a hideaway hole where valuable jewelry could be stored, or a small sack of gold coins could be concealed. But he saw nothing out of the ordinary. He started to examine the fireplace in detail. "What are you doing?" asked Brox. He had just walked into the living room and saw the shortling running his hand over the mantel. "Look at that." Thistlethorn pointed at the brick he had slid over. "A brick out of place?" "No, I moved it myself and heard a bolt slide." He quickly looked all around the fireplace. "But I don't see anything out of the ordinary." Brox put his hand to the side of his face, thinking. How about the closet to the bedroom behind the fireplace? The two of them made their way to the closet. When they looked up, they could see the bolt that Thistlethorn had heard. It had released a safety latch and had revealed a small handle. It took them several minutes, but after pulling the kitchen table into the bedroom and then wedging it sideways into the closet, they managed to use it as a foot brace, allowing them to climb up to a trapdoor. The secret entrance did not open on hinges, but it slid on a set of rollers. When the shortling opened the trapdoor, a rope ladder dropped down, producing 8 handholds. With ease, they both climbed into the attic. As to why the builders of the farmhouse would have a secret entrance into the attic was totally beyond the 2 little men. The effect, however, became very obvious. Unlike the rooms below that had been ravaged and trashed, the attic was untouched. That is not to say that it was neat, clean, and orderly, but it had not been willfully damaged. It had been filled with junk, and more junk. This truly is a hodgepodge-filled attic. Thistlethorn peered around in the thin streams of sunlight as they fought their way through large blotches of floating dust. Look here at these wooden statues, unfinished carved trolls and finished carved sphinxes, with their wings broken off. Empty burlap sacks labeled coffee, feathers, pine cones, flour, sugar, red clay, wheat, unrefined salt. He paused. What is unrefined salt? He picked up a bag labeled sticks and stones. What would one do with a bag like this? Break someone's bones? Brox chuckled in agreement. He opened a box full of bent, twisted, rusted, frayed, and snapped in half nails. He read a note scrawled on the side of the box. Nails to refurbish. Despite the worthlessness of the cluttered remains, they found themselves too curious as to what had been stored in the attic to just leave without searching through it. As Brox moved bolts of rotting cloth and a weaving loom, he found a box labeled buttons. As far as button boxes go, it looked rather large. More on the strange side, the button box had a lock on it. "Take a look at this," said Brox as he picked up the button box. When he did that, he instantly knew that it did not have buttons in it. First, it did not make a rattling sound as a box full of buttons would when picked up. Second, it felt very heavy. Thistlethorn set down a cracked wooden cup and walked over. "This button box is locked." Brox pointed to a tiny lock on the front of the button box. "Who locks a button box?" asked Thistlethorn as he examined the lock. "Someone who puts something besides buttons in the button box." After rummaging through the rest of the attic and not finding anything else of value, they climbed back down with the button box in tow. The lock had been so well constructed that Thistlethorn had been unable to open it in the thin light of the attic. Moreover, he needed a very stable surface area on which to pick the lock. Originally, he had set the box on the crossbeam of the roof support, but it proved to be slightly slanted, and the box kept sliding down. After setting the table up again in the bedroom, not the kitchen, Thistlethorn reopened his lockpick set and began to work. This is an awfully tiny lock. Most of Thistlethorn's picks would not fit into the keyhole. Therefore, he sprayed some acid into the keyhole, but it proved ineffective since the lock had been intentionally made to be resistant to corrosives. It took nearly a quarter of an hour and the whittling down of one of his picks before he was finally able to compel the locking mechanism to release. "You'd better step out of the room," said Thistlethorn. "Why?" "It could be trapped. An explosive contact spell, sleeping gas, a spray of poisonous needles, etc." A look of fear passed over Brox's face. "What about you?" Thistlethorn shrugged. "I'll manage." Then he added slowly, "Maybe." He remembered the time that a black paste exploded from a treasure chest. It ate right through his leather armor and started gnawing on him. Only a fast-acting cleric and her water sluice spell, a very minor spell, but highly effective, which removed the black paste, saved him from being turned into the black paste, too. "Go on. I usually can bypass any traps or trigger them in a non-lethal fashion." Brox accepted this and went into the kitchen to wait for Thistlethorn to check for traps. Abruptly, he heard a booming sound similar to a lightning strike in one's backyard. Doors and windows rattled, a wooden soup ladle split in twain, and something heavy in the living room fell with its own deafening crash. Moreover, Brox was bowled over by a sudden rise in the air's temperature, a sweltering, sticky summer heat sensation. Casting his personal safety aside, he rushed back into the bedroom. A jumbled haze of dust and smoke filled the room, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet inside. The table still stood there with the box of buttons, but the lid was gone. Brox felt the fading traces of magic in the air. "Explosive contact," muttered Brox. When he looked up, he was amazed to see virtually the entire roof of the bedroom blown off, pieces of roofing tar dangling in gauzy strands. Brox could not see Thistlethorn anywhere. "Thistlethorn." No response. "Thistlethorn." Again, no response. He started to leave and go outside to see if his friend had been blown through the roof when he saw the shortling huddled under the table. His eyes were squeezed firmly shut, and his arms were wrapped around his legs and pulled tightly to his chest. "Thistlethorn." Brox was yelling the other's name when it occurred to him that the loud noise probably had left his friend temporarily deaf. Thistlethorn looked up when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He gave a big grin when he saw the gnome peering down quizzically at him. "Explosive contact," said Thistlethorn. Brox responded to this, but the shortling only pointed at his ears, indicating that he could not hear. After sliding out from underneath the table, Thistlethorn looked into the remains of the button box. "Ah, just as I thought." He spoke very, very loudly due to his deafness. "I figured that whatever lay in the box of buttons would be unaffected by the magical trap, and such it is." Brox looked into the box of buttons. There, even in the midst of the haze caused by the smoke and rubble, Brox could see 3 pieces of finely crafted metal. He was a bit confused as to what they were until he saw Thistlethorn slide the pieces together, snapping 2 parts of a sword blade in place with a pommel being snapped on last. Like magic, and surely it was, the three pieces fused together seamlessly, leaving no trace that it had once been in different parts. Elven runes ran the length of the blade, their magical power causing the weapon to glow a faint blue. The two of them stood in silence, poring over the finely crafted blade, looking at their own reflections along its polished length. Here existed a weapon that had an enchanting history in and of itself that would take a lifetime to understand. The steel blade existed in a perfect, flawless, smooth, uncorrupted state. This weapon was a true treasure and worth the ransom of a king. They stood in silence with expressions vacant and unemotional for several moments before Thistlethorn finally spoke. "Can you read these runes?" Brock shook his head. "We both know that they are Elven. The only thing that I can tell is that they are an antiquated form of the Elven language, Elflock as it is commonly called. I would doubt if most elves could make sense of the words, save a few scholars of renown." He touched one of the runes. "I think this one is similar to the Elven word splinter, but I can't be sure. Does that tell you anything?" Thistlethorn shrugged. "Probably has something to do with it being in 3 parts, but I don't know." Brox picked up the sword and examined it for a moment longer. "Whereas this is a fantastic weapon, and we would like to learn more about it, I think we need to be going." Thistlethorn agreed. "I think you should carry this." Brox handed the sword to Thistlethorn. "Me? Why me? It's almost as tall as I am." "Good. Use it as a two-handed sword." He pointed. "Let's go." Brox and Thistlethorn returned to the kitchen where they found a door leading down into the basement. The basement consisted of grey-cut stones cemented together in a perfectly symmetrical fashion. A handrail anchored to the wall consisted of 3 poles that probably once served as spear shafts since a cut spike joint was at one end for each. The basement had its share of clutter, a black cast-iron stove, a chest of drawers, missing all of the drawers save one on the floor, a stack of burlap sacks piled to the ceiling that all said sweet corn in dingy yellow letters, and a colossal water vat designed to hold several hundred gallons of rainwater. This latter item was about a third of the way full. Next to the water vat was a simple, warped, wooden door that had etched into the wood the words root cellar in jagged letters like those of a child's writing. A cracked, tarnished, brass door handle hung loosely in its splintered socket, giving the appearance that it would soon fall off. Brox opened the door, and they both stepped into the tunnel with Thistlethorn setting a torch aflame so they could see. "These roots are dead," noted Brox, touching a brittle oak tree root that turned to powder. "Be careful with the torch or the entire tunnel might be set ablaze." Thistlethorn lowered the torch in response, being mindful of the warning. They only walked about 24 steps when they came to a door carved in the style of the Shellhammers, a clan of dwarfs that lived in the area about 5 centuries ago. Brox and Thistlethorn did not know that the farmhouse had been built on the foundations of Rock Cage, an outpost constructed by the Shellhammers long ago. The stone walls of Rock Cage had been taken away in the days of Cloak Toff and used to build a bridge about 2 miles south of the farmhouse. In fact, yesterday, the miniature mule troika had pulled the cart with its 2 occupants over it. The door that they now stood in front of had been constructed to serve as the portal into the Crossdown world, a realm that once served as a meeting place for various races that championed law, order, and virtue. How ironic that presently the same place served as a multiplex dungeon filled with lairs of vile monsters, a realm overflowing with tricks and traps that lead to pain and destruction, and a central core for those creatures of chaos that disregard law, order, and virtue. In due time, when the Crossdown world collapsed as a bastion of the free races, the Shellhammer dwarfs made the door to the Crossdown world a one-way door, unless one had the key to get back. This key, of course, had long since been lost among the dwarven clans. The door into the Crossdown world consisted of polished granite and stood in a stone archway. They saw, however, no door handle, just a rusty iron knocker shaped as a large ring attached to a single hinge. "I guess that we should knock," said Thistlethorn, pointing to the rusty ring. "And what if there is a band of hobgoblins waiting on the other side?" Thistlethorn handed the torch to Brox and pulled free the magical elven blade. "I guess that you should hold the torch, and I'll get this big sword ready." Brox took the torch, and after getting a nod of readiness from Thistlethorn, he reached up and flipped the knocker. Instantly, both Brox and Thistlethorn stood on the other side of the door. The door had been endued with a double-side spell that moved those from one side of the door to the other when knocked upon. "That's an unusual approach," said Thistlethorn, keeping the elven blade at the ready position. They both looked at the door behind them, viewing its backside. This side looked exactly as the other, save for the absence of the knocker. Instead, they saw a large keyhole. They took a brief moment to examine the door, quickly determining that there was no way back. "I guess I'll go first," said Thistlethorn, referring to the fact that he should lead the way down the dark corridor ahead of them. "Yes, you have always been better at spotting traps." "Perhaps that is so. Just keep in mind that some traps are virtually impossible to find, so be mindful if something happens to me that the same thing does not happen to you." Brox took that under advisement and fell in step behind the other by 3 strides. They made their way down a corridor 10 feet wide cut straight out of the stone earth. They felt a sense of ancient nobility that seeped from the walls, a sense that this place, Crossdown World, once served as a center of the highest principles, only to be lost to subterfuge, greed, and the general actions of self-interest and carelessness. The walls were not barren, but had lithographs of the champions of good making war on the armies of chaos such as orcs, gnolls, and hobgoblins. One lithograph had dwarfs and elves and men serving side by side in the Grand Council of the Realms. Thistlethorn favored the classic scene of a knight in shining armor riding forth to battle in order to rescue a damsel in distress from the cruel clutches of a fire-breathing dragon. Brox seemed partial to a cluster of cottages nestled in a valley with families of gnomes idly milling about in gardens and around a pond full of lilies and turtles. When they arrived at a split in the corridor that went straight ahead or to the right, Thistlethorn stopped. "I suppose that you are guessing which way to go," said Brox, taking a few steps to catch up with Thistlethorn. "That is a good observation, but I am more interested in this." He pointed to the wall on the left. "Looks like a wall to me." The shortling smiled. "Indeed it does. That is what it is designed to look like. Do you see how these stones jut out?" Brox nodded his head yes. "But I have seen 100 like that since we started this way. What is so special about these? Is there a secret door here?" "Not in the wall. The wall serves as a ladder. The secret door is in the ceiling." Brox looked up. The ceiling scaled a generous 20 feet up, and he had to strain his eyes. "I only see a small discoloration." He shrugged. "And I am not even sure of that." Thistlethorn strapped the magic sword to his back and proceeded to climb, easily working his hands and fingers into the stones that made up the jagged ladder. When Thistlethorn reached the topmost rung of the rock ladder, he could clearly see the minor discoloration that Brox had noted below. Not wanting to speak loudly, Thistlethorn made a couple of gestures indicating that he had found a sliding door. This had been painted to look like it was a natural part of the ceiling. The discoloration was caused by the fact that the paint had faded, but the stone ceiling had not faded. Thistlethorn did not automatically slide over the door, but he drew forth the magic sword strapped to his back, a tedious task to do while holding onto a single stone and considering the size of the weapon. He used the tip of the elven blade to slide the door over. He did this in case something waited above to attack. Indeed, something did wait. The clawed hand of a ghoul reached down, trying to strike the shortling and paralyze him. Nevertheless, Thistlethorn was prepared. He simply rammed the magic sword upward, causing the elven blade to pierce the ghoul just under the chin, deep into the throat. Due to his precarious position, Thistlethorn was not able to use much force in his attack, making an incision not more than an inch. However, the elven magic bestowed on the blade had a particularly destructive force on the undead. Hot streamers of blue energy shot down the length of the blade and into the ghoul, resulting in the separation of the undead creature's head from its shoulders. On the ground, Brox had to make a quick dodge as the body and decapitated head of the ghoul fell unceremoniously downward, splattering when it hit the stone floor. "Well, it's about time someone got rid of that thing," said a glassy voice from the room above the ceiling. That thing has been here for over 3 years, breaking and smashing vials, flasks, distilling coils, and rare, expensive components used by Vindigo the Meritus Extremus alchemist. The glassy voice made a tsk sound. So, are you going to come in or just stand on that stone wall? Thistlethorn tried to peer into the darkness of the room above and see who spoke. Even though he had the faint blue glow of the magic sword, it was not nearly as bright as the torch that Brox held 20 feet below. Thistlethorn wanted to see the other before he entered. "Let me get you some light so that you can tell where you are going." The voice coughed a couple of times. "I wouldn't want you to step on broken glass, not that you could avoid it since it's everywhere." The voice spoke a few unrecognizable words in a falsetto voice, and the room filled with light. Brox heard what had been said and called up to Thistlethorn. That was a command phrase to ignite a radiance caff, a common item among alchemists to make a room light up. Thistlethorn could see a very damaged, roughed up, smashed alchemist laboratory. Broken bits of glass were strewn everywhere and mingled with apparatuses such as mortars and pestles, diminutive burning stoves, wires, rods, clamps, and boiling rings. From his vantage point, the only thing that he could see that had not been damaged was a brick furnace used for making mixing bowls, flat pans, clay frames, powder soothers, and the like, all of these being essential for a well-stocked alchemist's laboratory. "Come on in," said the glassy voice. "There are no more undead nightmares lurking. I am not even sure how that one got in here." Thistlethorn pulled himself up through the hole in the ceiling. Even though he felt no danger, he looked around cautiously, trying to see the speaker. He saw a great deal more destruction of the ruined alchemist's laboratory, but he saw no one. "It's a little boy." The voice chuckled softly. Thistlethorn heard the voice behind him. Turning, he saw no one. To keep the conversation going, he responded, "I am not a little boy but a man. More specifically, I am a shortling. My most abject and humble apologies." Thistlethorn saw that the voice originated from a mirror. The mirror hung on the far wall, appearing round in shape with an intricate frame made of a silver-toned metal and highlighted with a rose-colored paint. Thistlethorn could see 3 words written on a little plaque under the mirror, but he could not read the language that they were written in. "A magic mirror," noted Thistlethorn in genuine admiration. "We do not think of ourselves as magic mirrors. We usually refer to ourselves as a Myris, which means wonderful. What do you mean by we?" "I and my 4 sisters. We were made by Rondo Rondurime." "Rondo Rondurime?" asked Brox as he climbed up, reaching the top stone rung. "Yes," said the Myris. "Have you heard of him?" "Indeed," said Brox, pulling himself in. "He is a legendary figure known for making magic mirrors." The Myris started to interrupt him, denoting that it was called a Myris and not a magic mirror. However, Brox went on to say, "Each magic mirror that he made is also known as a Myris." Brox went on explaining the name of Rondo Rondurime. A rondo is a composition of music that has couplets played in contrasting keys. Rondur is something gracefully round. A rhyme, at least as Rondo Rondurime used it, is a lyrical poem. He crossed his arms. Therefore, each Myris that he created could play music, was round in shape, and could sing poems put to music. The Myris had the image of a lady's face on it, a thin, plain-looking face with well-defined sharp eyebrows and rosy cheeks that matched the rose-colored paint on the frame. The Myris, obviously pleased, smiled and nodded in satisfaction. The magical construct, in response to Brox's knowledge, began to sing in a soft but dangerous-sounding voice. "Up high in the midst of the volcano Kill Mountains, a fire-breathing dragon dwells in the lava fountains. His claws are like daggers, his tail spikes like swords. Hide if you wish, but there are no resilient wards. He raids villages under the darkness of a moonless night. He rips to shreds caravans during the afternoon sunlight. He tears down castles and brings kings to their knees. He defeats 100 knights with absolute ease. Let me assure you, this tale is no myth. Beware of a dragon called Scythe. Both Brox and Thistlethorn had heard hundreds of tales put to music and sung. However, this was the first time that they could actually feel the magical terror of the words via the music, a true sense of forlorn foreboding. Both shivered from the tale. When was that composed? Brox's voice had a tremble in it. In the year 558, replied the Myrus. It was composed by the bard Rhymaster Flaxen during the reign of Her Regal Majesty Charlebrinia, the good Queen of Lavenstel. It was first performed at the amphitheatre of Arrak, during a torrential downpour. There were only 8 people in attendance, which included 3 elves, as opposed to the expected 500. Thank you, said Brox, his voice now calm, knowing that it was a song of antiquity and not one of current events. Tell me, said the Myrus. What brings you here? We seek a mirror that teleports. Said mirror is supposed to be located here in the Crossdown world. The Myrus smiled. It would seem to me that you have come to the right place to talk about mirrors. There are 7 magic mirrors in the Crossdown world, and being a Myrus, I know where all of them are located. There is the mirror of 4 images, the mirror of twice reflection, the mirror of statements, the mirror of twilight, the mirror of 2 walls, the farmer's mirror, and the broken glass mirror. The Myrus looked at Brox. I am afraid that I do not know of the mirror of teleportation. Thistlethorn cleared off the broken glass on a counter. After watching fine granules of glass, so small that they looked like shiny dust, float to the ground, he asked, so, what do those different mirrors do? The Myrus's face softened as it thought of the purposes of each mirror. Since these mirrors exist in my domain, that is to say the Crossdown world, I know when they are used, and sometimes, I can glean their purpose. The female face smiled, eyes brightening. The mirror of 4 images simply produces 4 images. As to why it does this, I cannot tell. The mirror of twice reflection shows you your own image, and upon request, the image of the last individual to have looked at it. This mirror serves no useful function beyond being thought of as a curiosity. The mirror of statements answers any legal questions and the history of laws for the Crossdown world. Since the government for the Crossdown world ceased to exist many centuries ago, its purpose is not very valid. The mirror of twilight leads to an octagon building. Would that be a teleporting mirror? No, I don't think so. It's just a door of sorts. She went on with her explanation. The mirror of 2 walls is on the front wall and back wall. It is actually 2 mirrors linked together. The farmer's mirror lets you check on the land around the farmhouse, where I guess that you came from, to examine the crops and animals. I can't imagine why it would be used anymore. The broken mirror is just that, broken. There might be some magic left in its glass shards, but that would be all. I have no reason to believe that it would allow you to teleport. Then, started Thistlethorn, speaking thoughtfully, I would guess that the mirror of 2 walls is what we are seeking. How do you come to that conclusion? Asked the Myrus. Do you know what the mirror of 2 walls does? No. I simply know that it is magical. No one has used it since I have been here. We are under the impression that we must walk backwards toward the mirror to activate the magic that teleports. Replied the magical construction resting on the wall. That would make sense. The Myrus did not explain how it made sense. May we inquire of you on how to get to the room with the mirror of 2 walls? Asked Thistlethorn. By all means. I can draw you a map on my surface, but that will take some time. The voice became very soft. Would you mind cleaning up the laboratory while I draw you a map? We would be glad to, said Brox. Thistlethorn nodded in agreement. The 2 little men moved around the room, sweeping up broken bits of glass first. Brox had located a keg o' devouring. Almost anything placed in it would be devoured over a period of time. Occasionally, a magic item, or an item that still had a magical residue about it, would be placed in it. Those items remained unaffected by a keg o' devouring and would remain in the keg until someone proved brave enough to fetch it out. Thistlethorn, who had not realized the inherent danger when placing one's hand inside a keg o' devouring, had reached in and fetched out a silver sphere that felt bitterly cold to the touch, almost causing instant frostbite. The silver sphere, called an Icinus Kybos, had served as a continuous frostmaker for the alchemist. Thistlethorn was greatly sobered when, after his hand was out of the keg o' devouring, Brox informed him of the danger of having one's hand bitten off by reaching in. The two went about cleaning and salvaging what they could as the Myrus drew a map on its surface. When the map was finished, the gnome and shortling were very impressed by the Myrus's drawing, which appeared three-dimensional in nature with a full spread of 16 colors. You are in the northeast region of the Crossdown world. The southeast and southwest regions have long ago collapsed due to earthquakes and magic gone awry. The northwest region is in reasonable condition, but it is beyond my sphere of knowledge. Since that is not where you need to go, that does not really matter. The Myrus took a deep breath, and after humming a note for perfect pitch, fired off a stream of facts in a sing-say fashion concerning the rooms in the northeast region of the Crossdown world. As the magical construct spoke, each room it spoke of glowed slightly on the map. You are here in the laboratory, which is part of the wing that contains the work corridor where you will find the blacksmith's room, coal mine, silver mine, long since dried up, wainwright, steam shop, candle maker's room, clay room for making pottery, and the deep shaft chamber. I do not know where the deep shaft goes. Maybe it is an old well. The Myrus sang even faster. Now, at this junction you will find a corridor that splits into two levels via the iron steps and the stone steps. Most of this area is made up of bedrooms and barracks. Dozens of rooms flashed on the glass surface. Here are some storage rooms, the dining hall, and kitchen. The kitchen glowed extra bright. If for any reason you need to enter the kitchen, make sure that you go through the iron door and not the outdoor. Do you understand? The Myrus did not wait for a response. Instead, it sang even faster than before, the words flowing in rapid succession. The two little men had to strain to comprehend her words. This is the grand corridor, so named because of the rooms found along it and its hallways. The largest part is the amphitheater, which is coupled to the High Council chamber. It was built this way to house a large number of dignitaries for certain ceremonies and conferences. It was not built this way so that the High Council members could watch performances at their convenience. In fact, by tradition, the amphitheater only put on a performance once every lunar cycle, lasting 3 days at a time. Both trophy rooms are along this short passage. Here you have the waterfall which provides fresh water to the entire Crossdown world. There are other rooms of interest over here, a quick series of glowing rooms, such as the guards room, lava tunnels, torch chamber, gallery, and rock bungalow. It paused. Oh, yes. Here is the lobby and foyer. A quick pause. All of this brings us to catacombs, for the place you seek can be found along this line of burial crypts. Behind this vault door can be found a room full of silver. The door to the room with the mirror of 2 walls can be found below the silver. The entire map faded away, and the face of the Myrus reappeared. There are several routes you can take to get to the room with the silver. The eyes of the Myrus fluttered. Let me tell you the most direct route to get there. You will need to climb back down to the corridor and take the passageway to the. A moment later, the gnome and the shortling had climbed back down the stones on the wall, making their way to the room with the silver.